Okay, so we are at Aleinu.
Yay.
A very well-known prayer. Maybe I'll even say a popular prayer with a very rich history, a checkered past. Let's see, I know, Kira, I remember you were at a presentation I gave on Aleinu. So you'll be an expert. An expert for us tonight.
I can't remember what I saw on the television last night.
All right, well then this will remind you.
This will jog my memory, yes.
Will jog your memory. Okay.
Yes.
So Aleinu is on page 183 in Siddur Sim Shalom for Shabbat and festivals.
Yeah. 182, I think.
183. So it comes right after In Kelohim.
Yeah.
We covered last week. It is on, I believe, 82 in the weekday Siddur. 83 in the weekday Siddur. And this prayer ends every single service, right? Morning, afternoon, and evening, we have an Aleinu at the end of the service. So it's got to be important, right? If we're ending every single service. I mean, the Shema only appears in 2 out of 3 of the daily services, right? But Aleinu appears in all 3. So it and the Amidah are probably the most commonly recited kind of parts of the service. So so what is it talking about? All right, so here is our here's I don't know, a translation. Aleinu literally means al on anachnu, right? Al is on or upon, and then the new ending is us, right? It is upon us. So say Aleinu l'shabeach la'adon hakol. So it is our duty, literally, it is upon us to praise the master of all, to ascribe greatness, literally latet, latet is to give, but to assign greatness, liotzer bereshit, to the author of creation, who has not made us like the nations of the lands, nor placed us like the families of the earth, who has not made our portion like theirs, nor our destiny like all their multitudes. But we bend our knee, or maybe, and we bend our knees and bow down and give thanks before the King of the kings of kings, the Holy One, blessed be he, who extends the heavens and establishes the earth, whose throne of glory is in the heavens above, and whose power's presence is in the highest of heights. He is our God, there is no other. Truly, he is our King, and there is none else. As it is written in his Torah, you shall know and take to heart this day that the Lord is God in the heavens above and on earth below. There is no other. All right, very grand. What do we notice about this? What are the themes? What else do you notice in this prayer?
Well, it's separating us from idolaters or other people, that's for sure.
Okay, there is a very this is a very particularistic prayer.
The contrast between the grandeur of God and the nothingness of the other nations of the earth.
Yeah.
I think, the whole space between heaven and earth, there's so much about heaven and earth below. So there's that.
Yeah, God is up above and we're down here, but God is the creator of everything that's down here.
Strong reaffirmation of this is our God, this is my God.
Romeo, you're pretty quiet. I think your mic's volume is down, but
Strong reaffirmation that this is our God, this is my God.
right. So our God, right? So it's in plural. So this is a very you could say this is a national prayer, right? So this is something that we recite as the Jewish people, as the nation of Israel.
Also, that one day all nations will recognize God.
Not in this part of the prayer.
Oh yeah, you're right.
You're jumping ahead.
Right.
Yeah. Anything else that
I'm
jumps out?
looking at the one that says there is no other, as if, I mean, there
Other.
were others in the past, but now they're saying, no, this is our God, and that there is no other. I don't know what the Hebrew.
Yeah, so that's
interpretation
from
is
Deuteronomy, the verse that is quoted at the end of this paragraph. Ein
So could
od.
that be making reference to the fact that at one time there were other gods? The way it's in the Hebrew? Do you know what I
Well,
mean?
so that's an interesting question. So in the book of Deuteronomy, the book of Deuteronomy is the closest to a monotheistic statement that we find in the Torah. But it doesn't quite state explicitly there is only one God in existence, right? It's more for the Jewish people, there is only one God, and that one God happens to be the greatest of all gods. But there's also statements in Deuteronomy that talk about how God, kind of apportioned the other nations, they've got their own gods that they worship. But for you, Israel, just the one God.
Well, even in that sentence, he is our God. There's implying it's for us. And also because it says higher up, who has not made our portion like theirs, nor our destiny like all the multitudes. So it's really separating us from everyone else.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And so we've got a different destiny. We are different. And from the very first line, Aleinu l'shabech, it is upon us to praise, right? So we, the Jewish people, have this special obligation to worship God in a particular way. And there may even maybe be implied some kind of cosmic significance of Israel's worship of God, that by us as the covenantally chosen people worshiping God in the proper way, we kind of keep the world spinning in the way that it's supposed to on a regular basis.
Well, that meant there's no other for us.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well.
All right. So we would say that from this first paragraph, it's a very particularistic prayer. I'll point out something, and when I spaced out the lines, I tried to bring this out. It's very much written in a style of parallelism. Right? So it's our duty to praise the master of all, right? To ascribe greatness to the author of creation, right? So we see this as a standard feature in biblical poetry, where we say the same thing, almost the same thing, but using different words, right? Who has not made us like the nations of the lands, nor placed us like the families of the earth, right? So what's the difference between those two concepts, right? Is there a difference, or is this kind of a poetic way of presenting it? And it's very consistent with what we see in biblical poetry, although this is not biblical. I mean, we quote, at the very end, we quote kakatuv b'torato, as it is written in God's Torah, but that's the only biblical quote that we have here. So the rest is kind of composed in a style, in a biblical style.
And is that because it's trying to appear biblical, or because it was written shortly after the biblical era?
Well, as we're going to see, we don't know exactly when this was written. But that said, it's probably very early that it's been composed, and my guess is that it's trying to emulate a biblical style, and we see lots of examples of later Jewish poets trying to use both the style of biblical poetry, often the language as well, using these obscure biblical poetic words in medieval poetic compositions. But here, actually, the Hebrew, I think, is not especially difficult in Aleinu. All right, so this is the first paragraph. Here is,
Rabbi,
yes.
Rabbi, I like to make a comment that the first paragraph is really censored.
But we'll get to this. We'll get to that.
Oh, okay.
All right. So this is the first paragraph of Aleinu as it appears in our Siddur Sim Shalom. All right. Second paragraph, Al Kain. So Al-Kain means therefore, right? So it's presented as the first paragraph is kind of the, what is it, the conditional clause introducing the second paragraph. Therefore, we put our hope in you, Adonai our God, that we may soon see your mighty splendor, to remove idolatry from the earth, and false gods will be utterly cut off, to perfect the universe through the Almighty's sovereignty. Then all humanity will call upon your name to turn all the earth's wicked towards you. All the world's inhabitants will recognize and know that to you every knee should bend, every tongue should swear. Before you, Adonai our God, they will bend every knee and cast themselves down, and to the glory of your name they will render homage, and they will all accept upon themselves the yoke of your kingship, that you may reign over them soon and eternally. For the kingdom is yours, and you will reign for all eternity in glory, as it is written in your Torah, Adonai shall reign for all eternity. And it is said, Adonai will be king over all the world. On that day, Adonai will be one, and God's name will be one.
Does that mean that everybody is going to be Jewish? It sounds like there's only going to be one God for everybody. And that's an interesting, is that what that means?
Anybody want to?
Well-
This is what the prayer. This is a pretty good translation of this prayer. So what does this mean?
You have all humanity. Usually, you don't necessarily see the all-encompassing population on Earth.
Right. So that if the first prayer was very particularistic, this is universalistic,
Yeah.
right? Is it saying that everybody's going to become Jewish?
No, it
Does
doesn't.
not say that, right?
Or
So
just accept God, just
Right,
accept
so
the one God.
being Jewish, being part of the Jewish people means we're part of the covenant between God and Israel. So this does not say that. This says that all peoples will recognize one God, and idolatry will be removed from the earth.
Mm.
Are
Yeah,
you
so that
still
doesn't mean
discussing
all
the?
Jewish.
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry.
Right. Kira, go ahead, then Sherry.
I said that doesn't mean that everyone is Jewish just because
No, does
they're
not.
talking about monotheism and it's one God. And then what you do with that makes the different religions. It doesn't mean, that the one God is only over Jewish people and you're Jewish or you forget him.
Right. Yeah. Any other themes or imagery jump out here? Or other connections to the previous paragraph too?
A lot of royal imagery of bending knees, swearing tongues, matches up with throne rooms that we saw previously.
Mhm. Yeah, and the bending knee I think is pretty significant. I mean, the central action in the previous paragraph was about how we as the Jewish people have a particular obligation to bow down to God, but it's just for us, Aleinu, it's only for us. But Al-Kain imagines all peoples bowing down, right? So that action of acknowledging, that physical action of acknowledging the one God is going to eventually spread. So we almost see that the first part is a kind of this world, this imperfect world. The second paragraph is this, really it's a messianic vision of the unity of all peoples. And that final quote is from the prophet Zechariah, who does present this messianic vision of imagining that all peoples of the world are going to recognize the one God.
Well, there are a lot of religions where people bend their knees. So, so this is part of that, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know. Again, for me, it's that kind of segregation, where what we do is the right thing and what you do is the wrong thing. And so therefore, you're not part of the holy peoples unless you do what we do.
Yeah.
That's what I'm getting out of that.
Although this is not as this is not saying that in order to be accepted by God, you need to become Jewish, right? This is acknowledging that there are different ways different, even legitimate ways of worshiping God. The problem that Aleinu and Aleinu have is with idolatry, right? It's people worshiping false gods, right? Or things that are not God, which the Bible certainly sees as being the root of immorality.
Well, and I understand saying that Jews should not be idolatrous, but why should other peoples who are not Jewish not be idolatrous too?
Yeah. I think
But,
the
I mean, you know,
idea of pluralism, let's say, the way that we understand it today, it's very new. Right?
Yeah.
But so I guess that can maybe lead to a question, you know, and we've, I think, asked this question often, is, you know, this prayer comes into existence at a particular time and place. So what's going on in the world at that time? And what did the author or authors of this prayer, what were they concerned with? Right? And so looking at the themes that are mentioned and the themes that are not mentioned may give us some insight into that, right? So the thing about that, what is not mentioned that we've seen in lots of other prayers in our Siddur?
Praise.
Gratitude.
Yeah, I'm not sure that the word thanks appears anywhere in here. Yeah. There's no sense of Messiah in here, right? No reference to Mashiach, which we do see in a lot of prayers. There is a messianic vision, but there isn't a concern with being restored to the land, right? For something that has such a grand vision, I might expect it to have some reference to the Jewish people being returned from exile, because we see that in a lot of prayers, but there's no mention of that here, right? So I know it's an argument from absence, but what might we conclude based on that?
Well, I mean, it talks so much about the universe and about the heavens and about the earth, but not about where on earth.
Mhm.
So it's more grandiose. It's a broader perspective.
Well, I was going to say it was written pre-exilically.
Yeah, so I think that when I think that's a fair assumption to make, is that this is being written at a time when the temple stands, right?
While the
temple is standing. And if you think about what the role that the temple plays, it's the center of the universe, right? This is where heaven and earth come together. And so if we have this worship going on in the temple, and Israel does see itself as being, you know, chosen by God to play this cosmic role, and imagines a future when all nations of the world are going to come and they're going to make pilgrimage to the temple here to worship God. So, you know, when Jews are able to worship in that way, then it allows us to think in much grander cosmic terms than if we're an exiled people, you know, struggling to keep our heads down to avoid attraction and praying for a return from exile.
Why do you think this is such an important prayer, that it's said at the end of the Shabbat service? It's said all the time. What is it about this prayer?
That's a good question. How would you answer that? I mean, focusing now on what this prayer means, and considering that it appears at the end of every service. So what is this statement saying for us?
I guess it's our acknowledgement that Adonai is our God.
Yeah.
It's just an acknowledgement.
It's a theological statement here. It's almost kind of it's almost a statement of dogma.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
think it's got acknowledgement that we're unique as a people,
Mhm.
and that we don't exclude everyone else. We want to include them in our God. Not that we want them to be us, but we
Yeah.
want them to also appreciate the one God.
Yeah, so that's how I choose to read this. I choose to take a more positive approach, that it's imagining a future in which humanity is united in some sort of shared moral understanding, right? We certainly don't have that now, but if you can imagine what that might look like. And in the meantime, we as the Jewish people, we've got a particular role to play in bringing that about. But we can imagine what that future can look like. And I think ultimately that's a positive message, and the move from the particular to the universal, where the universal still is not, it's not a totalitarian universal. It's not saying that all the peoples of the earth need to conform to our practice. They need, right? So, and that's pretty distinct from to other monotheistic religions, right? Which do require, acceptance of their system in order to get salvation. So this does not require that.
So also missing is any reference of mitzvot or sacrifices.
But that's more specific, right? This
Yeah.
is
It's
much.
it's theological rather than practical.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like the notion that it's inclusive.
Yeah. So, and if you look in Reform Siddurim, Reform Siddurim have historically been very uncomfortable with Aleinu. And so I know that in Gates of Prayer, there are at least 3 different versions that are possibilities. And I'm not sure how Mishkan Tefillah deals with it specifically, but the idea, I think, especially in the first paragraph, who has not made us like the nations of the land, right? There is this sense of superiority that seems to be expressed in these words. Of course, when this was written may help us understand, when we're talking about being superior to the other nations, are we talking about a world that is, where we're surrounded by idolaters who are, seen as immoral, or, so I think it's also important to keep that in mind as well. So, all right. So where does it come from, though? So the earliest version we have of Aleinu, where it's actually, the prayer is printed and we have the words of it, is in Siddur of Amram Gaon. So 9th century of the Common Era. Right, that's the first Siddur, what we started with, but we don't have the words of Aleinu appearing in any earlier material, and that makes it really difficult to accurately determine where this came from. It sure doesn't feel like a prayer that would have been composed after the destruction of the temple, because it just doesn't include any of the elements that other prayers do, and it's so focused on kingship and just the royal language. So here's a passage from Vayikra Rabbah, Leviticus Rabbah. It's one of the early collections of Midrash Agadah. So for those who have been studying Genesis Rabbah on Thursdays, Leviticus Rabbah is considered to be from the same kind of time and place. So 2nd to 5th century of the Common Era, from the land of Israel. So here, this is based on Leviticus 23:24, where it says, "B'chodesh hashvi'i be'achad lachodesh," in the 7th month, on the first day of the month. We would call that the 1st of Tishrei, right? So it says, Hadu dichtiv, as it is written, then we quote Psalms, "Forever, our Lord, does your word stand in the heavens." Okay, now here's the Midrash. "It was taught in the name of Rabbi Eliezer. The world was created on the 25th of Elul." And that of Rav comes out like that which Rabbi Eliezer taught. All right, so what are we saying? Rabbi Eliezer says the world was created, so day 1 of creation, the 25th of Elul. So what does that say about the first day of the seventh month? Which day of creation would that be? 25th of Elul. Elul is the sixth month. It comes right before Tishrei. So this would make the first of Tishrei, day 6 of creation, right? The day of God's creating of humanity. So that's what Rabbi Eliezer says. And then Rav, who's an Amora, right? So Rabbi Eliezer, he's a Tana from the land of Israel. Rav, an Amora in Babylonia, he comes in and he says the Atya de Rav Kahai de Tane Rabbi Eliezer. Rav comes along and he teaches like Rabbi Eliezer. He accepts it. Now there's a famous argument between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua about whether the world was created in Tishrei or in Nisan. So Rabbi Eliezer is the one who says Tishrei. All right, so what does he say? De Taninan Bitikiata de Rav. So literally, as we recite with the shofar blows of Rav. And then it says, Ze hayom tchilat masecha zikaron liyom rishon. Right, this day is the beginning of your works, a memorial for the first day, for it is a statute of Israel, and so on. And about the provinces it is said, which for the sword and which for peace, which for hunger, which for satiation, and for the creatures on it are they remembered, to remember them for life or for death. And then it goes on. So what's going on here? This language that we're using, if we opened up our machzor for the high holidays and we looked in the afternoon, well, in the Musaf service for Rosh Hashanah, we would find the bulk of the service that is specific for Rosh Hashanah is comprised of three sections. Malchuyot, Zichronot, Shofarot. Right? So we have 3 themes. Malchuyot means kingship, Zichronot, remembrances, Shofarot means shofar blasts. And the Talmud says that we've got to recite verses from the Bible on each of these 3 themes. There's an argument about how many verses have to be recited. We follow the position that says 10 verses, 3 from the Torah, 3 from the prophets, 3 from the writings, and then 1 final one from the Torah. So if we look at our machzor, we'll see that for each of those sections, we start with a prayer, some sort of non-biblical, either prose or poetic prayer, then the verses, and then a concluding prayer that ends with a bracha. And then we also then blow the shofar as well. So this quote that we see in Leviticus Rabbah, this actually is in our machzor in the Zichronot section. So what we have here in Leviticus Rabbah is a reference to the Tikiyata de Rav. So the Tikiyata de Rav, we would say, maybe the shofar service is the shofar service written by Rav. Now, Rav is known as a prolific liturgist. He wrote a lot of prayers. And so this is not the only place in the rabbinic literature that refers to the Tikiyata de Rav, but it seems that Rav arranged and wrote, either him personally or his school. He wrote liturgy based on the structure that was established in the Mishnah about what needs to happen during Rosh Hashanah. But he wrote liturgy for each of those sections. He determined which verses needed to be used, and wrote the introductory and the and closing prayers for it. So here we have the one for Zichronot. So speculation is, or at least one theory is, that Rav composed all of them. And so the Aleinu that we have was the introductory composition for the Malchuyot section, the first of the 3 sections, the one on kingship. In our machzor, that's what we do, right? So we start the Malchuyot section by reciting Aleinu. Exactly the same as what we have at the end of our services. So this is one theory, that that Aleinu was composed sometime in the 3rd century CE by Rav, And yeah, so it's based on this kind of evidence, although we don't have a direct reference to the words of Aleinu. Now, the problem with this theory is that the Aleinu is noticeably different in style than the other sections of the Amidah, and it just doesn't include themes that we might expect to find in a post-destruction world. So a famous scholar of liturgy, Joseph Heinemann of the 19th century, he introduced a theory which is widely accepted, that Aleinu, in fact, was a Second Temple era prayer. It was recited on Rosh Hashanah, as a declaration of God's kingship, and Rosh Hashanah is a universal holiday. It's the creation of the world. And so Aleinu has all of the themes that we might expect to find for something like that. Yeah, the problem is that we just don't have that Second Temple text that quotes Aleinu. And so then if that theory is correct, then we might speculate that Rav incorporated the Aleinu in the T'kiyata de Rav when he was kind of composing the prayers for the Rosh Hashanah liturgy, right? Yeah, it's all speculation, right? So we've got two theories here. One saying composed by Rav in Babylonian, 3rd century, or composed during the Second Temple era, and then maybe utilized by Rav. But either theory, it's being used once a year on Rosh Hashanah. That's it. It's not part of every service. Okay, let's take a look at that central line. Right? Va'anachnu korim umishtachavim umodim. So anachnu, we. Korim means to bend our knee. Mishtachavim means to bow. And modim means to give thanks, or we've translated earlier as gratefully acknowledge, something like that. So this tells us exactly what physical action to take. And while we don't have full prostration now in our regular services, on the high holidays, we still do. And so it's customary when we do the Aleinu, now called the Aleinu Hagadol, the Great Aleinu, is to do exactly what this line is suggesting, to do a full prostration onto the ground. The Talmud discusses different kinds of bows. There's a kind of a little waist bow, there's a kind of a deeper bending at the knees, but not going all the way down bow, and then there's this full prostration bow. And the Talmud has different names for them, but we, for the most part, have abandoned this full bow, except for on the high holidays. So here's a little diagram. See, we're standing straight and then bending the knees and dropping to the knees and then forehead to the ground. The next line, Lifnei Melech Malchei Hamalachim, before the King of the Kings of Kings. Let's see, I'm looking at Sim Shalom. How do we translate this one? We bend the knee and bow, acknowledging the supreme sovereign. I don't like it. It doesn't quite capture it, right? It's the King of the Kings of Kings. In some of the later parts of the Bible describing the Persian Empire, the title of the Persian emperor is the King of Kings. So the King of Kings, that's one more. So that might be another more argument for a pretty early date of composition as a perhaps even a polemic against the Persians. And then the last line, Hakadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be. Okay. So that's kind of the central line of this prayer. Okay, so we looked at this. All right, so this is from the Kolbo, which is a a collection of halachot, of laws on lots of different topics. Kolbo literally means everything in it. So, but that's the name of this work from the 13th or 14th century. And it includes, when discussing some of the laws of Aleinu, Vishamati sheYehoshua tikno b'sha'a shekavash Yericho. Whoops. Right. I heard that Joshua established it when he conquered Jericho. V'chatam bo shem kitnuto lemafreya. And he signed it with shem kitnuto. This is my translation. Like katan is the small one. Kitnut, like the lesser form of it, right? So the short form of his names, lemafreya, which means backwards. All right. So, and then he tells us, ayin aleinu shin shalosam vav. He writes va'anu korim, not va'nachnu, which is kind of interesting. Hey hu Eloheinu. All right. So let's look at that. So here's our Aleinu. So. Here's the hey. We're going to go backwards. We got a hey, we got a vav, we got a shin, and we got an ayin. And together that spells Hoshea, which was Joshua's name at first. He was Hoshea bin Nun. And then at a certain point, he gets a promotion and he gets an extra yud, and it becomes Yehoshua, right? So what do we say? The Kolbo says, I heard that Joshua wrote this and he even signed it, right? And so, hey, Vav Shin Ayin. Okay, pretty convincing, right? No, you don't think it's very convincing?
No, but it's your name too, so I could see where you would also.
I think it's convincing. Forget that hey, Vav Shin and Ayin are all pretty common letters, but
yeah, there you go, right? That's a good argument against it too.
All right, so but maybe there's more to this Joshua bit than we thought. All right, so let's look here. We got this is from Deuteronomy 33. This is Moses's one of Moses's final poems. He's describing describing each of the tribes. When he gets to the tribe of Joseph, when he gets to describing Joseph, who is from the tribe of Ephraim, he says this: Bechor shoro hadarlo v'karnei re'em karnav. Like a firstling bull in his majesty, he has horns like the horns of a wild ox. So Joseph is associated with being a bull, right? Each of the, many of the tribes, they've got an animal that they're associated with. For Joseph, he's the bull, and the word there is shor. Right? Now, Joshua happens to come from the tribe of Ephraim, right? Same tribe. So this is, all right, so that's kind of interesting. So let's look at the word shor, which means a bull. And we're going to do some gematria. So shin is 300. All right. How about vav? Anybody know gematria? What is a vav?
6.
6. And how about a rish?
200.
200. So what does it come to?
506.
506. Fantastic. All right. Let's look at Aleinu l'shabeach. First two words. All right. What's an ayin?
70.
Lamed.
30.
Shloshim. Yud.
10.
10. Nun.
6.
No, nun.
Nun is 50.
Nun is 50. And the vav, we had that earlier, 6. All right. How about a lamed?
30.
30. Shin, we had shin already. 300. Het.
2.
And chet.
8.
8. We want to add this up.
We have 66 on the right. Let's see, 330. 400.
It is 340 on the left, l'shabeach.
Okay.
456.
What do we got? 506.
506.
506. So what do we have now? We have Shor, referring to the tribe of Ephraim, which is Joshua's tribe, equals Aleinu l'shabech. Are you convinced now?
No,
No. Come on.
I think you can find anything anywhere.
I know, right? That's
Yeah,
what the
like-
gematria thing's all
Yeah.
about. It.
Yeah. You know,
All right. One more. Ana Bechoach is the mystical 42-word name of God.
It's got a beautiful.
We sing it,
melody.
actually, we sing it in the in Kabbalat Shabbat, right before the Chadodi. Let's look at the structure of Ana Bechoach. It's got 7 lines, and it's got 6 words on each line. Right? 7 times 6, 42. Okay, so there is a legend about Ana Bechoach that Joshua composed it and used it when they, for each of the 7 times that they circled, that the Israelites circled around the walls of Jericho, they recited each one of these lines. So 6 words in each of the lines. So let's look at the, so that legend exists about Ana Bechoach. So let's look at Ana Bechoach Gedulati Mincha Tatir Tzura. All right, that's the first line from Ana Bechoach. We're going to look at the first letter of each word here. Aleph is 1. What's bet? It's easy. It's 2. Gimel. 3. That's easy so far. Yud.
10,
10. Taf.
400.
400.
Oh, I'm sorry. Half is 20.
Taf.
Half is 400.
Tatir. 2. And Tzadi.
90.
90. All right. You want to guess what those add up to?
506.
506.
That's just digging around with all these.
Yeah.
possibilities.
you could go every other
All right,
word.
Kira,
every
you and I
person.
were on a.
So we've got
roll.
506. We've
We're
got
on
the
a-
name Joshua, the prayer Aleinu Shel Shabbat, Ana Bechoach, the prayer that Joshua uses to conquer the city of Jericho. All right. Well, all right. So this is all playful, but what is the meaning of this, right? So think about what Aleinu talks about, and what's going on when Joshua is coming in and conquering Jericho, right? Joshua is now the leader after Moses of the Jewish people, the Israelites. They've now just come into the promised land and they've begun the conquering. And he looks around and he sees this land that is filled with idolatry, right? His job is to conquer, is to remove the idolatry, to lead the Israelites in removing all of that idolatry. But he knows how insidious, how dangerous it is. And so the idea of attributing Aleinu to Joshua makes sense, actually, because Aleinu is saying that our world is filled with idolatry and all these other people, that's what they're doing. But we, the Jewish people, we don't do that. We have a special covenantal relationship with God. Our job is to worship the one God, right? That's what we are here to do. So I would say the drash on this, not forget the gematria, but the drash on this, on associating Aleinu with Joshua, does make sense, given what Joshua's role is in terms of rooting out idolatry, at least from the land of Israel. And then Al-Kain kind of imagines the future when it's all successful and Israel becomes really a light unto the nations, and kind of draws the other peoples of the world to recognize the one God. So I put this in the legend category. Rav or the Second Temple origin stories, maybe a little bit more historical in their origins. All right, now when did the Aleinu start to appear at the end of our services? So we have it appearing in the earliest Siddurim at the end of services during the 12th century. This is an account after a massacre of Jews in, I don't know how to pronounce this, Blois, France.
Oh,
Blois.
Blois.
Blah, blah, blah.
So 1171.
Boy.
And so this, you can, there's actually quite an extensive, if you're in Marcus's, the Jew in the medieval world, I think. It's a collection of primary sources from Jewish history. It includes the entire section. But so this is written, by someone who I guess got it from a firsthand witness to the events. And it starts with a blood libel. And there's a blood libel that's based on, as these things tend to be, a non-Jew who liked the girl, like the Jewish girl, who was then spurned by him, and it led to all sorts of jealousy and accusations, and finally it led to a blood libel, in which there's different versions, 31, 34, Jews end up being burned alive in a synagogue. And so this is kind of towards the end of this account. The account gets quite grisly, but says it was also reported in that letter that as the flames mounted high, the martyrs began to sing in unison a melody that began softly but ended with a full voice. The Christian people came and asked us, "What kind of a song is this? For we've never heard such a sweet melody." We knew it well, for it was the song, "It is incumbent upon us to praise the Lord of all," right? That's Aleinu l'shabeach la'adon hakol. Right? So here we have as a martyr, a prayer of martyrdom in the 12th century, Aleinu being witnessed by both Jewish and non-Jewish witnesses. So what else do we hear is that it's well known, it's beloved, it has a melody. Now, is it the same as our melody that we use today? I don't know. But this is a pretty significant source in terms of, one of the earliest pieces of evidence about Aleinu being used at a time other than Rosh Hashanah. And it's around this time that Aleinu also starts to appear at the ends of other services. So it might be at a time that was a really difficult time for Jewish communities. This is also, by the way, this around the same time that the first Yizkor service is introduced, the idea of remembering martyrs from the Crusades. So it's not far-fetched at all to be able to point to around this time period as the time when Aleinu starts to be utilized at the end of all services. Right. So, and I would say also that it has an association as being maybe even almost I don't know if polemical is the right word, but it's a reaction to Christian anti-Semitism. So it has that association, right? So they're utilizing a prayer that is already an old, well-known prayer used for used on Rosh Hashanah, and now it kind of gets this additional association as being a prayer of martyrdom. Okay, and although this is the version that we have in our Siddur, this is not the same version that they were using then. They had an extra line, right? Shehem mishtachavim lahevel varik umitpalalim el lo yoshia. So shehem mishtachavim, they bow down lahevel varik, hevel, the mere vapor, right? It's the breath that comes, mere breath or something like that. Rik is emptiness. Mitpalalim is they pray el to a God lo yoshia, who does not save. Right? So this is the version of the prayer, right? So thinking about it, let's say during Second Temple times as a polemic against idolatry, right? So we're talking about idols, right? But now they're utilizing this as a reaction to Christian anti-Semitism, and it may take on some different meanings here. So by the 14th century, Aleinu is now appearing in Ashkenazi and Sephardi traditions 3 times a day at the end of every service. And this line starts to become a source of trouble for Jewish communities. This is a very famous disputation between Rabbi Yom Tov Lippman Mühlhausen and Peter the Apostate, right? So Peter had been a Jew who had then converted and I think became a monk. And then there was a charge against the Jewish community that the Jews were saying heretical things about Jesus. And Rabbi Yom Tov Lippman Mühlhausen, as the kind of the leader of the community, was brought forward to argue the Jewish case. And Peter the Apostate, he brought out this line from Aleinu as saying this is an example of Jewish heresy. They're dissing Jesus. And then he goes and he uses some gematria. So let's take Varik.
There we go again.
Yeah. All right. Okay, so we've got Varik. We've got a Vav, which is 6. We've got a Resh.
200.
200. Yud.
Eser.
Eser. 10. Kuf.
100.
100. Equals
360?
316. All right, so let's three. What else equals 316? Well, let's take Yud. Let's keep it simple. Yud, 10.
Eser.
Shin, 300. Vav, Shesh.
It's Yeshu. Yeshu.
Yeshu, right? So what is Yeshu?
Varik. Yeah. So
Right.
Yeshu is nothing.
Yeshu is nothing. Yeshu doesn't mean anything, right? But the claim that Peter the Apostate says is Yeshu is Jesus. Now, all right. The problem with it is that this isn't how you spell it, right? We're missing a letter, but that doesn't matter. This is the argument he makes, because you could. It's supposed to have an ayin at the end, and it's like it's a silent letter. So, all right. So Rabbi Yom Tov Lippman Mühlhausen, he brings 4 arguments against Peter, and he wins the debate. He actually wins, even though it's usually, it's not an equal playing field, but he wins, at least in his own version of it, because he writes a book called Sefer HaNitzachon, which means the book of victory, in which he talks about this disputation and he describes his victory. So he brings 4 arguments against Peter. The first is that he says varik, emptiness. This is referring to images of wood and stone, and there's no substance to wood and stone. And right, so if you're trying to claim that, this is saying that what Peter's saying is that you Jews, you are telling that we are, because we got all these icons and these statues that were right. So you're saying that you're attacking us for this. So the rabbi says, come on. No serious Christian believes that all these icons and the statuary have any actual divinity in them. He writes, only women, children, and villagers hold on to those false beliefs, right? right?
Of course.
Serious people, they understand that these icons, these statues, these are just symbolic, right? Right? So come on, right? You and I both know that there's nothing to that. And so when Jews say he didn't make us like the families of the earth, we're just talking about the villagers and the farmers, right? Who don't know faith and only accept that their divine images have substance, right? We're not right. And you yourself, Peter, you would agree that these statues have nothing to them. So we're all on the same side here, right? So no disrespect meant. All right. Argument number 2. The gematria is wrong, right? This isn't how you spell Jesus, right? Enough said. Number 3, part of the accusations is that the Talmud is dissing Jesus, right? And he brings that, and there are a number of passages in the Talmud, and but Rabbi Yom Tov Lipman says whenever the Talmud talks about Yeshu, it's not talking about Jesus. It's talking about some other guy named Yeshu who lived a few centuries later. So don't be so sensitive about it, right? And then finally he says, just that Aleinu has nothing. Aleinu has nothing to do with this, right? So so in the end, he wins the debate and he saves the Jews. The problem is he probably made it up, right? All his arguments, because this idea that Jews were in fact thinking about Christianity when they said these words, that existed. I mean, that was very real. We saw that, in the martyrdom scene, that it is a reaction to Christian anti-Semitism. A 13th century commentator, so before a couple centuries earlier, explicitly talked about the gematria of a Jewish source, talked about the gematria being a reference to Jesus and Muhammad, right? And again, his math, we're not going to go through the math, but his math is sketchy, but he makes the statement, right? He makes the claim that Lahevel Varik is a reference to Jesus and Muhammad. And so that we've got, the earlier part is maybe against idolatry, and then we have this line that is a diss on, these two major monotheistic religions, ostensibly monotheistic religions that Jews are living under the authority of. And so this line then becomes a way of kind of a polemic here, in fact, a polemical rejection of Christianity and Islam. So, Yom Tov Lipman Muehlhausen may have been not entirely truthful in his disputation. On the other hand, if he lost, it was going to lead to massive executions of the Jewish community. So I think he can be forgiven for stretching the truth a little bit. So, all right, now, whatever meaning this may have had to the people who were saying it, it definitely was not written as a way to discredit Jesus or Muhammad. It's quoting the Torah, or it's quoting the Bible, right? Umitzrayim hevel varik yazoru, lachen karati lazot rahav hem shavet, right? For the help of Egypt shall be vain and empty. Truly I call this, they are a threat that has ceased, right? So Isaiah, he's dissing Egypt, right? At a time when they're definitely, pagan idolaters, right? So the language of hevel varik, emptiness, mere vapor and emptiness, this is coming from Isaiah, who is most certainly talking about idolatry. And the second part of the line, also from Isaiah, mitpalim el lo yashia, right? That's the second part of the line here. Come, gather together, draw nigh, you remnants of the nations. No foreknowledge had they who carry their wooden images and pray to a God who cannot save, right? So again, explicitly talking about idolaters. So this line from Aleinu is just quoting Isaiah. So I think it's fair to say that the origins of this line have nothing to do with Christianity or Islam, even if it may have gained some association with that later on. All right, I want to just finish this up. Kira, you recognize this, of course, don't you?
You're muted, Kira.
Yes.
All right, anybody else know what this is?
Beautiful. I don't know what.
Beautiful. You think it's beautiful, Rita?
Yes.
No.
I can't see the images on it, but I like the shape of it.
Yeah.
No, I have no idea what it is.
It's from a shul. It's
Yeah,
from a
from a
shul. 19th century, I think. This is a spittoon,
Ah, yuck.
which used to be common features in synagogues.
Really? Where
Wow.
was it? At the
All right,
entrance?
reek. Remember, that's emptiness. The hevel
Uh-huh.
varik, right? So reek is pretty close to rok, which means spittle. All right. So there was an expression. Kommt zum Ausspähen.
What's the last word?
Ausspähen is to
Ausspähen.
Is to spit.
The spit, right? Kommt zum
Ausspähen,
Ausspähen.
yeah.
He comes at the spitting. He arrives at the spitting. So this referred to somebody who showed up to shul at the very end of services. Yiddish expression. Right? Right? Why? Because there was a part of the service where people spit.
Symbolically, or because they have
No,
too much
actually,
saliva?
that's what the spittoon is for.
Like poo poo poo?
No, like
Not exactly.
spit,
Like really?
really spitting. Right? Now, it might have been at a time when there was lots of tobacco chewing going on, and so people needed to spit in something. But there also was spitting going on during Aleinu. When they got to this line, the Hevel Varik, right? They pray to a God of emptiness and vanity, to a God who does not save. They would spit when they got to the line, to the word reek, because reek sounds like rok. Why are they spitting? Right. And we know they did it, but this expression, he arrives at the spitting, is like saying he showed up at Aleinu, right? The last prayer of the service, right? So the spitting time. So why are they spitting during Aleinu? And this tradition of spitting goes all the way back to the 15th century, right? There's a reference from a 15th century rabbi in Mainz where he's describing spitting once when we arrive to this word. Right. So why? So the answer is because that line became so problematic that that Christians started forbidding Jews from saying it. And so you have in many Ashkenazi Siddurim in the 16th and 17th century, the line is removed. It doesn't appear. And in some of them, there's actually a blank space left, right? So it's not our Siddur just doesn't leave any space, but like they actually left a blank space for it. So it's like everybody knows it's there. We're just not going to print it because we'll get in trouble if we print it. And so it was just passed down orally. And so what apparently was happening is people would not recite it out loud, but they would spit when they got to where it was supposed to be. Right? So the act
How
of
does
spitting.
that physically happen? They all come up to the spittoon at once?
Yeah, where there's
No, there were
only
lots
one?
of spittoons.
Oh, got it.
I mean,
Right. Well, I think actually initially they were spitting on the floor. Right. Somebody got the idea we need to put a spittoon in because they're spitting on the floor of the shul. And that, right. But so you can just imagine people are praying and all of a sudden they go silent and spit because they're reciting this line that we're not printing in the Siddur, but everybody knows it's there. And so we're spitting as a form of prayer. And so that led, of course, to the installation of spittoons.
oh my goodness. But Rabbi,
Yeah.
how could the Christians know about this, or how did you say they had to refrain from saying the word?
Oh yeah, because the Christians were very, at least in some parts of Europe, were very concerned with what the Jews were doing. There's tremendous anti-Semitism. They didn't want the Jews doing anything which was considered an insult to Christianity. And so one example is that, and we actually have the records of it, in a community in Prussia in 1703, there are kind of the accusations about Jews dissing Jesus and their prayers revived. And so the authorities censored the line from Siddurim, and they knew about the spitting. And so they made it illegal to spit in that part of the service. And they required congregations to sing it out loud so that they could make sure that nobody was spitting.
Oh my
Right? We want to hear you say it, and we want to hear you say it without any spitting. So, and then not only that is that they hired government inspectors to hang out in synagogue at the door to make sure that that nobody was spitting. There's no record of anybody being prosecuted for this, but there is record of like civil servants being paid out of community coffers to hang out in synagogue and make sure nobody was saying this word, that they were doing it out loud, and that nobody was spitting.
Oh, my goodness.
Rabbi, maybe I'm one of the few people who still remember how to spit in a synagogue.
Yeah,
Yeah,
do tell.
in the 40s and the 50s. I remember.
In a
First of all,
spittoon?
you know, no, on the floor. In Israel, of course, there were only Orthodox synagogues, and almost any Orthodox synagogue, you could see it. It's not a big deal. It was part of the service, but later it changed.
Did you remember doing it during Aleinu?
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Right.
Interesting.
So the expression, right? Right. So
Flashbang,
that's
yeah.
well known. All right. So
I still think
this
it works
is
for,
Siddur Hashalem, the Birnbaum Siddur, right? So this actually Sinai used to use this Siddur.
I have one.
It's a blue Siddur, and so you can. Here's Aleinu. Aleinu Shaber, right? Below Samanu Kishbachol Hadama, Shalo Sam Chokinu Kahem, V'gor Aleinu Kechol Hamonam, Va'anachnu Korim Umishtachavim Umodim, right? No reference whatsoever to that verse.
Right.
Right? This is a Birnbaum that it's an Orthodox Siddur, right? 1949. This is the complete Art Scroll Siddur 3rd edition, right? So I scanned these out of Siddurim. So this is 2003. Look here, right there, in parentheses. Shehem mishtachavim lehevel varik umipalim el lo yoshia. Parentheses.
Reek.
All right. This is the Koran Siddur, the most recently published Orthodox, kind of officially sanctioned OU Orthodox Siddur, 2009. Here, V'gor Aleinu kechol hamonam, period. Shehem mishtachavim lehevel varik umipalim el lo yoshia, period. Va'anachnu korim. Right. So what we're seeing is over 60 years, a gradual reintroduction of this line, right? Right. So I mean, and we understand that it initially was removed because it got Jews into trouble, so they were forced to remove it. But maybe even the requirements, that the non-Jews placed upon them actually served to even, reinforce the idea that this line was a diss on Christianity. Right? If they hadn't tried to outlaw it, it would just been another line in the prayer. But the fact that they tried to outlaw it so severely transformed it into something that, in fact, was a diss on Christianity. So, but as we've become more comfortable in our position in the world, we can see at least in the Orthodox Siddurim that it's made it back. It's not made it back in any of the conservative Siddurim. I think the idea of not wanting to diss, people of other religions is probably something that, regardless of the history where we are, right now, that's not something that we want to be emphasizing. We're trying to establish lots of positive relations with people of other religious traditions, and so we don't need to include this particular offensive line. So
I've never, this is a rude awakening to me. I just never thought that we would have that we would be dissing anybody. I mean,
Well,
we could diss
understand
what
where it
we
came
could
from.
diss what they're doing because we don't do it, but it's very interesting.
It hasn't been that long since Vatican II,
That's true.
right?
Yeah, we were plenty dissed.
Right, and
More than dissed, more than
and
dissed.
so I guess if we think about just kind of the long span of history, it shouldn't surprise us that these kinds of theological polemics find their way into regular liturgy, right? You know, when Jews are being burnt at this, burnt at the stake, and it's being kind of characterized as an act of martyrdom, to see how that affects our prayers and the way that we remember these things. I think that has tremendous meaning. And for Jews that are continuing to live under persecution for centuries and centuries and centuries, I wouldn't expect them to ever remove these kinds of things. It's only in the modern era when just kind of we would hope that the way that we interact with other religions is
Wouldn't require this kind of thinking.
in some sort of fundamental way.
Yeah.
I'm trying to imagine the martyrs singing and the Christians saying, and they're being burned, and the Christians are saying, wow, the beautiful melody. It's just hard to imagine they continue burning them and not be moved by that and change their path. I don't know, just hard to imagine humanity like that.
Well, we're beginning to see a little bit of that kind of humanity in this
Well,
world.
it's been around forever, but I'm just
I
saying.
know, but it's, anyway, this was
wanna actually just mention one other thing that I came upon. The line in the Alkane. Oops. Okay. It says L'taken olam b'malchut Shaddai. So this is Tikkun Olam, right? So this is where the term Tikkun Olam appears in our prayer book. It's an ancient term that goes, back to the Mishnah. It means to fix the world. L'taken olam b'malchut Shaddai, under the kingdom of Shaddai. Here it's translated to perfect the universe through the Almighty's sovereignty. So Tikkun Olam is, at least in the earliest layer of meaning, had to do with a decree that the rabbis made to correct a situation that the Torah didn't account for, right? So there's a situation of injustice, or something is wrong is happening, but the Torah doesn't provide any guidance for dealing with it. And so we need to issue a decree in order to make things more just. And so that's how the rabbis use that term Tikkun Olam. Later on, it gains mystical significance as being through the act of through an inner act of performing a mitzvah with the right kavanah, with the right intention, we can create this restoration of the cosmic brokenness, right? So nothing physical. This is more of a mystical, spiritual kind of fixing. And then in recent decades, it's taken on a sense of more, social action or social justice, at least in more kind of liberal parts of the Jewish world. But it appears here in the second paragraph of Aleinu, L'taken olam, to fix the world under the kingship of Shaddai. So I saw a suggestion recently that it's a misspelling.
Oh.
That the kuf right there is actually supposed to be a kaf. L'taken olam b'malchut Shaddai, which means l'taken is to prepare, right? To prepare the world for the kingdom of Shaddai, when all flesh will call you by your name, which frankly makes more sense. Because it's the idea of tikkun just doesn't seem to, in the way that it's understood, doesn't seem to fit the context of this prayer. But the idea of establishing God's kingdom, that does fit the context of the prayer. So I think, I'll need to see a little bit more research, but I found that to be a plausible explanation for or not explanation, corrective for that word.
Letaken with kuf, I think it sounds nice because letaken, it means to repair.
To repair. But I'm not sure that the concept of repair fits into the rest of this paragraph, as opposed to establish, letachen. Anyway,
Yeah.
But one of the beautiful things about our having an ancient Siddur is ancient liturgy is that we can contain multiple layers of meaning at the same time. And we've seen this lots of examples of where the Midrash, let's say, will respell a word in order to create a new layer of meaning, right? So if we want to talk about tikkun with a kuf as being repair, and to see in this kind of universalistic expression of Al-Kain, we want to see some sort of prayer for unity and peace between the various peoples of the world. Yeah, that certainly is something that requires a repair of the world as it currently exists. So I think it can have both meanings for us and work as prayer.